friends, my name is Haley, and today I'm going to talk about my recent reads. So, I think a lot of you have had the same problem where quarantine, even though you find yourself a lot of time, it's been really hard to focus on reading. So, I haven't read as many books as I normally would. So, this is actually going to be all the books I've read since the beginning of the year up until the one I just finished like 5 minutes ago. And if you're wondering why I said a couple months ago that I was about to start a new schedule of filming and start posting things regularly, and then that didn't happen, the computer that I borrowed also stopped working. So I've just had terrible luck with computers lately, but I was finally able to buy my own computer. It's brand new, it's not used, so hopefully we won't have this problem again for a while. So I'm really excited to get back into the swing of things, and now hopefully my word is good that I'll get to a regular schedule, but I'm not going to make that promise anymore because clearly that goes really badly for me. But anyway, let's get into my recent reads. So the first book that I read at the beginning of the year was actually this graphic novel, Diana, Princess of the Amazons, by Shannon Hale and Dean Hale. I forgot that they wrote that. They also wrote the Squirrel Girl novelization that I think is so fun. I still need to read part 2. This was also really cute. It's called graphic novels for kids, so it's probably like any age. It's not age inappropriate for anybody. I just don't know like what the reading level is, but it's a pretty easy book. The art is super cute. That was actually why I wanted it. My boyfriend actually got this for me for just a random gift. It's about Diana dealing with being the only child on the island of Themyscira. I'm not the best at pronouncing that name. I'm close. Because her mom made her out of clay, so she's the only child. So she makes her own friend out of clay, and her friend isn't the nicest person. She's not the best influence. So it's a lot of learning to accept yourself. It's super cute. It has a really good moral at the end, and I had a really good time reading it. A lot of these books I'm not going to hold up because I either checked them out from the library or bought them digitally. I love reading ebooks. I know that's an unpopular opinion, but I absolutely love it. So the next book that I read was Night Sky with Exit Wounds by Ocean Vuong. I decided to read this book because the Books Unbound podcast decided to make his novel the book club pick for that time period, and a lot of people said that it wasn't really narrative enough, like there wasn't enough of an actual story. It was just very flowery, and while they enjoyed his writing, there just wasn't enough story. And I'm very story-based type of person, so I didn't think it would appeal to me, but I was still very intrigued by the author and what was said about his writing, so I decided to pick up his poetry book. Also because I've been very intrigued by poetry, and I've been trying to find where I sit with it, because I'm not the biggest fan, but in theory it speaks to me if I can find the right kind, and this book spoke to me. His writing is so beautiful. I highly recommend that you check it out, especially if you're like me and you're trying to find where you fit in the whole poetry world. Like you want to read more but you don't know where to start. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was very intriguing. He's Vietnamese and LGBTQ+, so I learned a lot from a perspective that I don't know anything about, which was really interesting. And I noticed I worked on a project earlier this year about Vietnamese poets, and I feel like that whole culture is really starting to flourish here. So that's actually something that I want to explore more, is just Vietnamese poets. So if anybody has any recommendations for me, please leave them below. I would be very intrigued to hear and to get more names to check out. The next book I read was Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. I have it up there on the shelf, but after recent events, I don't really care to pay the respects to it at the moment and pull it out. Everybody knows what it looks like. And I think everybody's having a hard time dealing with what their relationship to Harry Potter is right now, but I like that the community has kind of come together and said, we are still who we are. It's just not J.K. Rowling's anymore. It belongs to us. So I still like Harry Potter. I read this, of course, before this whole thing happened. And that was actually an interesting reread for me because I found that I really don't like the book that much. There's a lot of exposition told through other characters, and I felt like it was boring. There was so much where they're just overhearing. There's a chapter, I think, a whole chapter where it was them overhearing someone. Like Harry was listening in on some old lady gossip or something. I think I knocked it down to 4 stars because it's still Harry Potter and I still love that world, and it is the finale, and there's things about it that work, but I was just surprised that Ren, life with a cat is hard. Next is a book I had a bit of a controversial opinion about, and that was Clockwork Princess by Cassandra Clare. I started this book last year in like November, and then I got like a third through maybe and put it down, and then I picked it up again because I just wanted to get through it because I still hadn't finished City of Heavenly Fire, so I wanted to get to this to get to City of Heavenly Fire basically. And the reason I had set it down was that the weakest thing about Cassandra Clare's writing for me is how many perspectives she adds in. We get like Sophie's perspective and Will's sister, and I didn't feel like their perspectives advanced the story. It was just to get more relationships, to get more characters together. And there were more of the Lightwood brothers. I just didn't care about those perspectives, and I felt like it made the book unnecessarily long, and it just dragged it out for me. I know that a lot of people love this book, and if you did, I'm curious if you liked those perspectives or if you just loved the book despite the perspectives. I'm really curious why this book is so popular, because I absolutely loved Clockwork Prince. That was my favorite of the trilogy, and I always hear people say this is the best Cassandra Clare book, it's the best finale to any of her stories, and I didn't see it, so I'm just curious why people love it so much. I by no means hated it. I think I still gave it like a 4 stars, but I was a little bit disappointed. And maybe part of it was that it's been so hyped up, but I was a little disappointed. And I will say, spoiler alert, if you haven't read it, I'll give you a timestamp if you don't want to hear the next part here. But I did not care for Tessa being with Will and then the epilogue with her getting together with Jem at the end. It felt like Cassandra Clare couldn't make up her mind. I wish that she had just stuck with one, because it takes so long for them to figure out this love triangle, and then Tessa finally chooses Will, which I personally think she wanted to be with him the whole time. A lot of people think that she and Jem were perfect, and I like Jem a lot. But it felt like she was with Jem because she felt bad. Like, I think she did love him, but I definitely felt like she loved Will more and wanted to be with him more, but she got in this situation where she kind of had to be with Jem. And then she finally gets to be with Will, and then we get our whole rush job of their entire relationship until Will dies, and then years later, she gets back together with Jem. So it felt, as a reader, when you get only like, I forget how much time it is, you only get like a chapter or just like a little overview of her relationship with Will. So it feels like she was barely with him. I know that she was with him for the rest of his life, but as a reader, it feels like she was barely with him. So it just wasn't a satisfying ending with me. I would have preferred for her to end up with one or the other. I know that's an unpopular opinion. I do like the love triangle. I think it's very interesting how the three, how their dynamics work. I'm not saying that I don't like that. I just personally would have felt more satisfied if there was more of like a definitive ending to the relationship, if that makes any sense. Then next, I finally got to get to City of Heavenly Fire by Cassandra Clare. I'm having a hard time remembering a lot of what happened in the book. I did like it a lot. I thought it was a very good ending to the series, especially when I didn't like book 4 and 5 very much. They were a lot slower than the first 3 books, but this was a really good finale. It wrapped everything up very well. Had the same trappings of character perspectives that I didn't care about, especially Maya was the one that stood out the most. Her story didn't add anything to this book. I liked the character, didn't need a perspective. Like, just because you like characters, you don't always need their perspective. And I feel like when you get all these unnecessary perspectives, it really bogs the story down. That's why I prefer the original trilogy, because it was mostly clarity. Like, we ended up getting Simon's perspective later on, and that was okay. But once you start getting more and more and more, that's why this book is so big, which I don't mind how big it is, just, again, too long. But overall, I really liked it. I loved how it wrapped up. Clary and Jace are my OTP, so their ending was very satisfying. where Simon was left was very intriguing. Overall, I enjoyed it. Next, I read The Honey Don't List by Christina Lauren. It's one of their more recent, is it their most recent? It might be their most recent romance novel. And this one is about one of those like HGTV kind of fixer-upper couples who have a TV show, and it's from the perspective of their assistant and the guy who comes in to be an engineer, but kind of he isn't given the opportunity he was promised and ends up also kind of de facto being an assistant as well. The couple is, their marriage is kind of crumbling, and they're going around touring a book that is ironically about relationships. So the two assistants are trying to keep the peace and keep the public from finding out about that this couple isn't as perfect as they seem along the way. So of course, things don't go very well. I filmed a whole review on this book with a lot more detail, but unfortunately I wasn't able to edit it because the computer stopped working. So if I can, I'll try to get the footage off the other computer and edit it together, because I had a lot of really interesting kind of mixed thoughts about this book. I gave it 3 stars. I thought it was intriguing, but not as a romance. I felt that it focused more on the crumbling relationship of the other two and not the romance of the assistants, which was fine. It's just not the way that it was marketed. So it's interesting expectations versus reality kind of thing. But overall, it was a pretty fun book. I did like it. Next, I read A Crash of Fate by Zoraida Cordova for the stay-at-home reading rush, and this book highly disappointed me. You can watch my reading vlog if you would like. So it takes place in Galaxy's Edge, which is the new Star Wars land in Disneyland and Disney World. So I was excited to learn more about the land and the lore behind it, but it was told through the lens of this relationship between two friends who hadn't seen each other in a really long time and then finally meet again. And it's really just about that. And there's a little bit of conflict, but barely any. It's like introduced in the last third or something. I had a hard time getting through this book, and I only did because I was reading it for the reading rush. It was very disappointing. It was fun to hear a couple of the references to the different vendors and stuff that are in the land, but it wasn't enough for me to enjoy the book. Next, I read Well Met by Jen DeLuca. I love this book so much. So this is a romance that takes place in a Renaissance fair. So the main character, Emily, moves into this small town to help her sister who got into a car crash so that she can take care of her niece and kind of help her get to school and everything. And one of the things she has to do to help her niece is volunteer at the Renaissance fair with her. The person who runs the Renaissance fair is Simon. He's kind of A-type personality about the Renaissance fair. Everything has to go perfectly because there's a lot of history with his family behind it. So they butt heads a lot because she wants to kind of try to change things a little bit. He doesn't want things changed. There's a lot of miscommunication, but not in the bad way, I don't think. The romance is so cute in this book. I love Renaissance fairs, so that setting was amazing. I want to read tons of Renaissance fair themed romances now. If there's any other that exists, I know there's going to be a sequel to this called Well Played that I'm eagerly anticipating, but if anybody knows of any other Renaissance fair themed romances, please leave them in the comments because I want to read all of them. I'm almost tempted to write one myself, but I don't know what I would write because this one is so perfect. So please help me. Also, this was probably my favorite book of the year so far. I love this book so much. Next book that I read was The Wallflower Wager by Tessa Dare. This was my first historical romance, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. It was about Penelope, who is seen as kind of a spinster. She's in her like mid-20s, which, you know, at that point, if you're not married in that time, you're done for. But a lot of people think she's weird because she takes in all of these sick and abandoned animals. So she's got like a parrot that used to live in a brothel and it says very inappropriate things, which is adorable. She has a goat who is great. What ends up happening with the goat is so funny and it pays off very, very well. I absolutely adored it. A lot of kittens, just animals everywhere. It's a menagerie. And she follows her bird one night as it... Ren, what are you doing? I don't know what my cat is doing. She follows her bird as it flies into the house next door, and when she gets to it, she finds that a new, very handsome man has moved in. Oh my God, Ren, are you done? She finds that a handsome man has moved in, and a romance blossoms. What are you? Oh my God, she's just wants all the attention right now. And the person who has moved in has this not so great reputation, but they end up falling for each other. So there's a little bit of give and take with the relationship because they come from two different worlds. She's a lady. He came from poverty, and while he's made a lot of wealth for himself, he won't let himself forget where he came from. So their character dynamics are actually very interesting. Of course, the animals were what drew me to the book, and they were a nice thread throughout the story. So seeing the two of them learning to accept each other is actually just a very cute story. I think I gave it 3 stars. I wasn't the most impressed with it, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a very good time. Next, I read the Magnus Bane Chronicles by Cassandra Clare, Sarah Reese Brennan, and Maureen Johnson. See, you can tell I'm slowly trying to make my way through the Shadowhunters Chronicles. I'm very excited to get to Dark Artifices, so I'm trying to get to the other side books. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about this one because, like, I like Magnus, but I've never been totally obsessed with him. I was never really like a Malik shipper. So the first story in this is awful. I almost recommend you skip it. There's no, it's called like What Happened in Peru. It's so bad. It doesn't even tell you why, like the whole thing is this is how Magnus got kicked out of Peru. And then by the end, it doesn't even tell you how he got kicked out of Peru. Like, I'm sorry for the spoiler, but it's not important. You don't need to read that one unless like you want to be a completionist, which I get. That's what I've been trying to do as well. It's really bad. I feel like the short stories kind of slowly get better as they progress, and the last few are very good. My favorite is the fall of the Hotel d'Amour. So it's about how the vampires were feeding off of all of these cocaine addicted humans, and it shows how the vampires acted under the influence of cocaine. It was very horror-like and very well done. That was definitely my favorite story in this. There's some really good ones in this book, and by the end of it, I was a Malik shipper. Like, I hardcore. They're one of my OTPs now. I love them now. Like, they're one of my favorites. So good on this book for that, at least. That was fantastic. The next book that I read was Radiance by Grace Draven. I've been comparing this one to the relationship between Daenerys and Khal Drogo, although it starts off much friendlier. So it's about these two people who are betrothed to each other to make a union between two kingdoms. They're both like the lowest born into the royal family, so they're still prominent enough to make peace, but otherwise they have no bearing on the kingdom. So the female is human and the male is from this race called the Kai, which I describe them kind of like orcs. They have pointy teeth, fangs. They're nocturnal though, and they have like really cool glowing eyes, and they have gray skin. So naturally they both find each other hideous. But what I really like about this book is that they are friends right off the bat. They get along very well. It's like a total friends to lovers trope, and it's just very nice to see this couple slowly learn to accept each other and love each other and eventually find each other beautiful. I think it's a very beautiful story, and it's not just romance heavy. There's politics to it as well. It leaves you on a very interesting cliffhanger, which I haven't read book 2 yet. I'm trying to just give myself a little bit of time so that I don't get through it all at once. This is a very beautiful book. I think I gave it 4 stars, but I don't know why, and I'm probably going to change it to 5 because it was so beautiful. It was another one that I couldn't stop thinking about. Between this one and Well Met, oh, this has been a good year for romance for me so far. I love this book. I highly recommend it. Next, I read Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me, and I'm going to reference my phone because I want to get the names right. So it was written by Mariko Tamaki and illustrated by Rosemary Valero O'Connell. I loved this book. So it's about this girl, Freddie, who has this kind of on-again, off-again relationship with Laura Dean, who's kind of like the most popular girl in school kind of thing. She's always just kind of called on whenever Laura Dean is bored, but Freddie is very unsure about how to handle the relationship, and she always kind of comes back to her. and it felt so relatable. Especially, this is exactly what it was like for me in high school. I didn't date anybody, but there was this guy that I liked who did not treat me well, and it just was very reminiscent of that. And I think it's an important book for anybody who's trying to navigate dating in high school, and it's very nice to see the journey that Freddie goes through. But honestly, this is probably the most relatable thing that I've read this year, and possibly ever. Like, it is a 5-star book for me. The art is also very beautiful. I think pink is like the only color in it, if I remember, which I really like that kind of limited color palette. I think that's beautiful in books. And there's a lot of LGBTQ representation and diversity in the book as well. Overall, fantastic book. Highly recommend it. Read it. Tell all your friends to read it. All my friends who are watching this, read it. It's a great book. And then I read Orange Volume 1 by Ichigo Takano. And this one I've heard a lot of really good things about. The basic concept is this girl gets a letter one day that is from her future self telling her to go out of her way to be friends with the new guy in school, and you eventually learn why she's trying to change the future. I thought it was interesting. This is another one that's been hyped up a lot, and I didn't really quite get why. Only because it was strange to me. Like, I didn't mind it, I enjoyed reading it, but I think a lot of relationships in manga end up being kind of odd. And in this one, the main character, when we see her in the future, she's married and has a child, and she's telling her past self, I regret not telling the guy that I liked him. And I'm like, are you trying to change the future to be with him? Because then that means your child wouldn't be born. And I had a problem with that. So I don't know where it's gonna go from there. Unfortunately, my library doesn't have anything beyond Volume 1, but I thought it was odd. If anybody's read it, let me know what you thought of that, or if that was something that even occurred to you, or if it bothered you. Because otherwise, I thought it was a cute little romance, but it's hard when it's tainted by, if she gets with this guy, she's not gonna have her child that she has in the future. So it was strange. But overall, it was cute. I think I gave it's about like a 3-star book, but I personally think it's a little bit overhyped. So that's going to do it for my wrap-up of books that I read so far this year. Hopefully, maybe the next one won't be for 6 months, and it'll be more for like 3 months, and I'll have read more books. Thank you guys so much for watching, and you will see more of me, I promise. Until next time, I'll see you guys soon.